Okay, I don't know if this is gonna work. I will certainly give it a try. It will look like I'm a crazy person talking on the street, but should be fun. Okay, so I just left the gym. I am walking home and I decided to give it a try to a project that I thought about doing about 3 days ago, and I've been postponing giving it a try, although it has to be something that is done every day. Basically, I was listening to a podcast from Joe Rogan, that is one of the biggest podcast guys in the world, and he was talking about this idea of do a stream of consciousness podcast after a very, very, very strenuous day of work. He does some running on hills and crazy things like that. So, and I have been working on my new training regimen for about 3 weeks now. And I thought it would be interesting because I've been working on a podcast and a vlog for a while. And I thought it would be interesting to do something less produced, just whatever interesting subjects that are on my mind, or at least interesting to me, and I hope interesting to you. So without those ramblings, let's give this a try. First, little context about me. You may be listening to some people speaking in Russian or Ukrainian around me. My name is Pedro Bonatto. I am a Brazilian photographer that used to live in Canada, and now I'm spending some time in Kyiv, in Ukraine. My wife is Ukrainian. She's a dancer. I am a photographer and a musician. And again, apologies if you know me, which is probably who's going to be listening to this first episode. I just need to give a little context, and if you know me, at least you all know how I choose to identify myself these days, having had many different life's approaches and interests, from physics student to actor to designer to government employee. But now, at least for the last 6 years, I have established myself as a photographer and as a musician, primarily in percussion, world music, and I've been in Kyiv for about 5 months now. And I'm about to go up a steep hill. So, again, apologies for the sounds. This is still a test. I'm using a lav mic. That is a lavalier mic next to my mouth, but it's an omnidirectional mic, meaning it picks up sound from everywhere, not just from one direction. So you might hear some cars, and there might be some interest. So anyway, I have a podcast called the Wanderings Podcast, where I interview people from different walks of life, from musicians to comic book artists to scientists, that are doing work related to subjects that I'm interested in. And I try to bring their stories not only for my own curiosity, but maybe to spark some interest in those subjects in you. And even in a more meta way, which is something that I want to do with this podcast as well, is not only the subjects themselves, but the meta analysis of analysis sounds very fancy, but it's basically what's happening behind it is a push towards following your curiosity. It's something that I finished my podcast with, the Wanderings Podcast, and in a very real way has been shown to be one of my main interests. showcase, point a light to things that may be interesting. But more than focusing the light on something that is interesting, is the approach that everything is interesting if you look at it deep enough. I thought I was sort of alone in this, having 400 different interests and always feeling very jealous of the Renaissance man that actually did something with it. And over the last few years, I've been trying to actually do something about it. Sorry if I am a bit out of breath. I am about 93 kilograms as of this recording. I am about 170. I think it's like 7 or 8 inches. I'll check and I'll let you know my height. Anyway, I'm awfully out of shape. Not that terrible, but certainly not good. And I decided to actually go to the gym and exercise, and I've been doing this somewhat consistently for the last 3 weeks. And then I came up with this idea of, as I mentioned, inspired by a podcast from Joe Rogan, of talking to you on my way home. I'm thinking of calling this Walk With Me. I haven't done a Google search yet to see if someone had this podcast name for their own project, but if they haven't, that's what it will be called. If not, I'm sure I'll find another name. So, as I was mentioning, I have this podcast called The Wanderings Podcast, where I interview a bunch of people. Then I also started a vlog called The Story of an Image, where I deconstruct and comment on different photographs that I created. I should mention that my main interests are in fashion photography and fine art. So basically I like to photograph people in beautiful environments, and sort of like environmental portraiture. Just a fancy way of saying taking cool photos of cool people in cool places. But it actually goes beyond that. And I've been trying to think of ways to make that career something bigger and more sustainable. I think photographs are objects to think with. They're things that inspire us to act. As Dante Alighieri said, that beauty inspires us to act. I think even on things that are poo-pooed, which are like advertising and people trying to take advantage of your basic biology to sell you tires or lipstick. In a way, of course, it's a bad thing to manipulate people, but at the same time, it shows the power that an image has. The power not to enslave you, because anything can enslave you if you let it. A power to get you pointing at something. An image, especially a photograph, is this interesting hybrid. It's this interesting portal between something that it could be, that we want to be, because of the realistic nature of what we're doing. Let me see if I can step back and explain what I mean by that. When you see something like Game of Thrones, and you see a dragon, and you see the lady controlling the dragon, dealing with it, they're doing their best to try to make that dragon appear as realistic as possible. What does it mean to be realistic in that context? It means that it blends with nature as if it was part of it. Whenever you see a dragon in a cartoon, for example, it is a representation, and that is already a representation of nature, at least one step away from the real. So when you see an image, and I will call that photography, even though it's a moving picture, but on that sense that we're trying to emulate a real world, it makes the fiction become reality. And that's why they spend millions and millions of dollars in each detail of how a dragon walks, of how it looks, the textures, hours and hours of rendering to make that thing look like a thing and not an idea. In a way, photography, even if you take a photo of a model with lipstick, as the example that I mentioned before, and you use the healing tool in Photoshop to make her skin looks more like what people want them to look for different reasons we'll talk in different episodes. When you get to that level of understanding of photography, meaning you know it's not a representation of reality, but in a way it is a representation of reality that you wish it could be true. That's where the power comes from. It's when you invoke archetypical longings. And by archetypical longings, I basically mean whatever ideal you had. How can I put this? Oh, also, it's very, very strange to walk around in Kiev where people basically do not speak English. It's fine, I don't speak Russian yet. And I look like a crazy person just talking on the street in English. But I guess over time people are used to crazy people talking. Now they have a crazy Brazilian talking in English on their lovely streets. Also, today is December 8th, 2019. It's about 4 degrees, so not that cold. Certainly much better than Toronto. So, coming back to the idea of the lipstick and the skin and all that, I'm sorry, there will be a lot of tangents. As an example, this was a tangent about tangents. When you have a photograph like that invokes archetypical, that's where you were, archetypical ideas, archetypical longings, as I was saying, as this ideal that in a way is deeply ingrained in us, like wanting to be strong, healthy, and with good skin, with all the biological markers and sexual selection forces that propels us to value that kind of thing. And at the same time, that urge helps, in a way, create civilization, a civilization that actually helps us achieve something close to that goal. So there is, even in advertising, even if it's in its lowest form, something through market forces that propel the world to keep moving forward and hopefully regulating our, let's say, less noble desires to something good, which it is, if we're going to boil down to an idea, is I want to have this. How do I create something of value so I can have this thing? At the same time, I think photographs go way, way beyond this kind of understanding, and they transcend into art. I'm walking close to an intersection and I'm not sure how the sound will be, but I hope you'll bear with me, and I hope this is still recording. So, when you have a photograph that transcends that and becomes, for example, I'm not going to talk about art yet, but let's say a photograph that become like from photojournalism that becomes so iconic of its time that everybody knows and everybody assigns meaning to it, meaning their own or given to them by the milieu of the culture. That photograph transcends it. And even when you have photographs of Auschwitz camps or whatever happened in Hiroshima, those terrible like projections of people burned to against the rocks after a nuclear holocaust, children being burned in napalm and all those crazy, terrible things, or to more beautiful images, in a way beautiful, when you have the soldier saying goodbye to, I think it's a Cartier-Bresson photograph, the soldier saying goodbye to the lady at the train station, something that is so iconic and so powerful that sometimes reality matches the mythological stories underlying it, and that's how they become so powerful, I think, these images. So you have those images that define our time. Another example of this is the first time we had the photo of the whole Earth in one single photograph. I think it's from one of the Apollo missions, and they took a photo of that, of the whole Earth, and in the 60s, and I think that changed the world in a very interesting way, although it's too early to tell how much influence and how much forgetness we got, like how much we forgot that. So then we go to photographs that are elevated or at least changed to art status, something that is as elusive as trying to decide what pornography is or right from wrong. So whatever definitions of art will be, when you create a photograph that is intended to be art as much as a painting is intended to be art, or a song that you create, something that did not exist and would not manifest itself on its own. I'll give you an example. I take photographs. I did a series a while back called The Orientalist, where I took photos of contemporary dancers in Oriental fashion, meaning ballet dance, Iraqi dance, dancers from the Middle East, and musicians. And they were in different parts of the world, and they were all the photographs aesthetically were inspired by Orientalist paintings from the 18th and 19th century. There were, of course, a lot of representations that I wanted to do in the photographs themselves, and I am sure I'm going to talk about this later. But on that series, the main thing that I got to do was to create this modern interpretation of what painters in the 19th century were doing, fascinated with the Near East, which is something that I am as well. On that series, those photographs would never have come to be if it was not for an intent to make them happen. They existed first in my head and in the heads of the people that helped me, and they were shaped by both those people and the environment in which they were created, and one photograph to influence the other. The technical limitations that you have, and the knowledge limitations, and the aesthetics limitations, all of that, that delta between idea in your mind to the actual realization in a photograph, that's what I mean by creating a photograph that would not happen spontaneously. I can go to the streets and take photos of people or buildings or things that are happening, and those photographs were there to be taken in a way. And of course, the photographer has all the merit of finding that and actually going out and taking the photographs, but that's a different kind of art form, I think. It's not what I try to do. It's not documental photography. It's more of a creation of a world. And I think, in a way, especially when you have a body of work, all of that is a creation. All of that is an attempt to create a world, which comes back to, as I approach my house, I'm just a few meters away from it. Whenever you approach that kind of artwork that tries to create something that will inspire you to act, you can get into a lot of traps. One of those traps is that you, how can I say this? You're just trying to sell something. As I said, you're trying to manipulate the person to buy something. And then you have the other version of this, which can be even worse, when you have that art and that those trigger points being created to trigger you into an ideology. That happens today in politics, in current political climate around the world. It happens in Hollywood, and it happens in the church, and all those institutions that are trying to create, for good or bad, a way of living and use art to inspire you to act that way. And then you have transcendent art, which is not necessarily something that is better or more noble. It's more of a personal thing. It's us as individuals walking in the dark, trying to light our own candle and showing other people what we see on the walls of the cave. So that's ultimately what I believe art can do. And I think even art that is created with those, let's say, quote unquote, lesser forms, they still have their place and they can actually take you to transcendence. It will be something I'm sure I'll be talking about later in other episodes. So I guess this has been about 20 minutes. I have no idea. My phone is in my pocket, so I don't know if this is being recorded. It would be interesting either way. I had fun time talking to you. I imagine you walking with me. So I'm getting to my apartment now. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I hope you found this interesting, and I can't wait for the next time that we get a chance to walk together. So thank you for listening.